Conversations with Nicole. Conversations with Nicole. Let's talk about it. Tell me all about it. I'm here. I want to know what's on your mind. Ooh, the world needs to hear from you, and I'm so glad to have a conversation to reach the nation. And it's all about you. We'll help each other to discover innovative ways to positively change the world. Let's talk about, let's talk about, yeah. Let's talk about conversations with Nicole.
Greetings. Happy Monday. Welcome to Conversations with Nicole. I am Nicole Everett, your host, and Conversations with Nicole is a talk show based in Tallahassee, Florida, focused on connecting the community through conversations. And today is what I call Mindset Monday. Mindset Monday is an opportunity for you, me, and my guests to have a conversation. And today's conversation is around suicide and grief and helping you to cope. September is Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month. And so we are kicking the month off with a conversation around suicide. We'll look at the risk factors as well as some grief tips and tools and techniques. We will talk about grieving, especially as it relates to youth, and also give some resources around that as well. So I'm excited and delighted to have you all here. Been in South Florida. Happy Labor Day to you all. Hopefully you've had a great holiday weekend. So I want to start off how I typically do, which is asking you to put your name, not your name, your city or your state in the comments, city and state in the comments, and we will give you a shout out. So I see you. My cousin Denise, who is in Texas, thanks for being here. And Miss Dara Gaiman Moody, thank you for being here. Greetings, Dara. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Put your city and your state in the comments for us. I see you, Miss Debs in Tally Ho. Thank you for being here. Happy Labor Day. And Hassan in Pensacola, thank you for being here. Appreciate you, my brother. All right, so it has been quite the weekend. All right, Ms. Dara's in Tallahassee. Thank you. Quite the weekend. I have been down in South Florida. My Rattlers got whooped on pretty bad yesterday, but it was like FAMU homecoming, but Miami style. So I had a great time fellowshipping with the peoples, but we gotta, lick our wounds and regroup and come back fighting. Next Saturday, we play Albany State in Tallahassee. So hopefully we will have a W then. All right. I see you, Miss Tracy Gole. Thank you for being here. And Miss Pumpkin, I saw you at the game. Good to see you. Thanks for being here. So tag a friend, let them know they need to be in the place. Again, we are talking about suicide and grief and helping our young people, our youth, to cope. So while the rest of you are chiming in, logging in, I'm going to go ahead and read my guest bio. Mr. Antwan McKenzie-Plez is the owner and clinical director of It's All Grief LLC. He's a grief and trauma specialist, author, and a bona fide neuroscience fanatic. He loves the human brain and all of its amazing capabilities, including the ability to access true healing and restoration. He is a licensed mental health counselor, licensed by the state of Florida, currently working on licensure in additional states. He has a bachelor's of science in ESE, K through 12, a master's of arts in clinical mental health counseling, and a graduate certification in alcohol and drug abuse counseling. He's trained and experienced in providing a number of therapies, including brain spotting, EMDR, cognitive processing therapy, and trauma-focused CBT, just to name a few. So help me welcome Mr. Antwan McKenzie-Plez.
Hey, and good evening, everybody. Hey, Cole. I'm excited to
Hey,
be with you tonight.
and I'm so excited to have you. So excited to have you. So we
Yes.
connected via Psychology Today. I found you on Psychology Today, called you up, and I enjoyed our initial conversation, and I'm excited to
Mhm.
have you on here tonight. So welcome, welcome. So
Thank you so
before we
much.
my pleasure. So before we get started, I want you to let the people know who is, and he goes by Twan the counselor on his social media handles. Who is Antwan McKenzie-Plez? Who are you? Not what you do, but who are you?
Yes, great question. And it's good to make that distinction because I think it's so hung up on titles and what we do. So thanks for making that distinction. So yes, I go by Twan the counselor, and that's probably the best way to segue into who I am as a person. Very rarely in my life, in my personal life, do people call me by my full name. All my friends and family call me Twan. And then that's sort of the way I practice too, is that I just really try and bring myself to every session. So Twan is uh, uh, a Miami native, a South Florida native, just like you. Nicole, we learned on our first call,
Yes.
grew up in kind of all over Miami, Liberty City, North Miami, Miami Gardens. We kind of moved around a lot when I was a kid. Went to the illustrious Miami Northwestern Senior High School. Ended up moving to Broward in my high school years and graduated from Miramar High School. So kind of got a nice little mix of experiences, the South Florida experience. I still live in South Florida now, and I practice. My practice is located in Fort Lauderdale, but of course we cover the whole state of Florida. Um, and so yeah, that's who I am. I'm a real Miami boy, you know, with those experiences of growing up in Miami in the late '80s through the '90s, and all that came with. We're going to get into a lot of trauma and grief and stuff today. And so, you know, people always ask, what is it that leads a person to specialize in such a thing? And I said, well, just ask them their story, because usually what a person specializes in is what they have the most experience with. And so I am a grief worker by nature, but spiritually and by calling, I really am a healer. And I approach my work in that way. Even before I became a therapist, that was kind of what I understood about my purpose here. And so that's a little bit about me. Anything else you want, just feel free to ask.
All right. No, that's perfect. Perfect, perfect, perfect. All right. So before we dive in, before we get into our topic, I since I do have a clinician on, you all know what I like to do, and that is read my disclaimer, which states that find it, hold on, that all topics, past, present, and future on Conversations with Nicole are for informational purposes only, and they are not to be used as a diagnosis for treatment or an answer to any personal issue related to the topic being discussed before, during, or after the program. All right. So you have done a lot of grief work, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
All right. So tell me, and I want to dive into a little bit before we talk about suicide, but why grief? Why, you consider yourself to be a grief counselor, a grief professional. What is it about grief that has attracted you or drawn you to this work?
Well, I see grief as life is. That's just the way that I kind of approach grief. So I don't see grief just, the textbook definition is the psychological, emotional, physiological response to loss, right? But most people tend to think of grief only in the sense of how I feel after somebody that I loved has died. But in actuality, grief is our mind, our body, our spirit's response to change. So with every change, there is some loss involved. And so whether you're dealing with issues around trauma, whether you're dealing with issues around depression, anxiety, a lot of times the way I approach solving those problems is by asking the question, in this situation, what have you lost? All right, so my practice is a group practice. It's not just me. I'm just the lead clinician there. But what I really try and kind of guide my clinicians along is with this belief that all loss is trauma and all trauma is loss. Therefore, it's all grief. And if we can help you to figure out what it is that you're actually grieving, then we have an understanding of how to move you forward through grief. But grief is an important topic to me because in my already pretty young life, I've experienced quite a bit of loss, both death and abstract loss. So when we talk about abstract loss, we think about things like loss of safety, loss of routine, loss of security, sometimes even loss of identity. So I approach it because I always say, he who feels it knows it. So my initial interest in grief started at about 8 years old when I lost my very best friend, my grandmother. I lost my grandmother at 8 years old. And that pretty much, that shaped kind of the way I approached life. Life just didn't feel the same anymore. And I think a lot of families can relate to that. A lot of Black families in particular, it's like when Big Mama is gone, the family is never really the same after that. And everybody's really trying to catch their bearings after something like that happens. So that for me was my entry into it. And then very shortly around that time, I lost my other best friend, my grandpa, and even at that age, the adults around me couldn't really explain what was happening, what I was going through. And then just there had been accumulated losses. My itself has a lot of trauma history, a lot of loss, a lot of early deaths and things like that due to health issues and other political issues.
Right.
And so having gone through those losses, I started to notice patterns about how people behave around loss. And I just started to make certain connections. And then in my undergraduate years, really got into the work of Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was like the mother of grief study, and just kind of really spiraled from there. And then as I became a clinician, it was a really good friend of mine who is also a clinician really helped me to understand that you do realize you approach everything through a grief lens. I wasn't even aware that I was doing that. It was just my natural approach, but I was helping so many people. And so that is how I became a grief and trauma specialist.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. And so to hear someone tell you that you approach everything through a grief lens, what did that sound, or what did that feel like to you, I guess, to hear that?
It felt like the missing piece to the puzzle. As a clinician or whatever your profession is, you're always trying to understand your professional identity, and you try and understand how the personal and the professional kind of merge. And so hearing that really gave me a sense of direction for how I would go forth in my career. So, and I'll give that a shout out. Her name is Jessica Jefferson. She's a friend of mine. She was the person that really sat me down at the beginning of my private practice career and helped me to see that. And ever since then, it's been, pretty clear there what life's work is.
Okay, very good. So I want to go ahead and let's dive into suicide. September is Suicide Awareness Month, Prevention and Awareness Month. And we specifically want to talk about how to help youth youth cope. That, we've seen the numbers, especially amongst African American um, boys, girls, especially boys, go up. And so a number of really notable folks as well. We've heard in the news just this year from Regina King's son to the mayor of, I forget what city in Maryland, Miss USA, all, not youth, but relatively young, 20s, 30s, 40s, that are dying by suicide. And so when you experience that type of loss, how do you manage that? How do you grieve from that? And how do you assist your children in grieving? So, a number of questions around that. But let's start out with suicide. I want you to talk about suicide and kind of how to help you deal with that.
Okay. Sorry, my notifications are going off. I guess friends are watching. I first want to start by highlighting a recent study that was done by the Acoma Project. And I really want to give them a big shout out because they are, I want to say, one of the first groups to have done an extensive study on mental health for BIPOC youth. And their report is called The State of Mental Health for Youth of Color 2022. And what they were looking at is they were looking at two major causes. Number one was the COVID-19 pandemic, and number two was racial injustice and the issues of racial justice around the country. And they sampled some youth of all different backgrounds, all of them youth of color. And some interesting numbers came out of that. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to share a few of the statistics that came out of that study. So their sample was broken down 49% 13 to 17-year-olds and 51% 18 to 25-year-olds. And some of the interesting findings, and I'm primarily going to focus on Black youth, just for the purpose of this study. But some of the interesting findings was that Black youth, in terms of anxiety, seem to be struggling specifically more with decision making and worrying about bad things happening. Right? When we think about that, you have Latinos, Asians, Pacific Islanders. They had more like situation anxieties. They were thinking about specific decisions that they needed to make and like avoiding punishment and things like that. But for Black youth, the things that they tend to worry about was bad things happening. And I think that that's a significant finding out of that report, because you look at the idea of, I work with a lot of young Black men, even the idea of learning to drive. I have teenagers that come to talk to me about just the anxieties that they have about learning to drive. Why? That fear of getting pulled over, that fear of reaching the wrong way, and that could be the end of your life. And I don't want to make this an overly sad discussion, but there are some key things that I think when we look at mental health, we have to really fine tune the Black youth perspective, because they have concerns that no other group has. Another interesting finding that came out of the report was at least half of all youth reported experiencing moderate to severe depression and anxiety. Some youth of color had significantly high depression and anxiety disorders. 26.8% of all youth reported suicidal ideation in the past year, with no differences across racial groups. Females were more likely to report suicidal ideation, and 18% of their sample made at least one suicide attempt in the past year. The most important statistic there, Black youth were significantly more likely to make a suicide attempt compared to Latino, Asian, and American youth. Wow. So we can see that we truly do have a serious epidemic rise here. So I just really want to give a shout out to the Acoma Project for even taking on that study and producing these numbers for us so that we can make some meaningful changes in our community and really what's underpinning these issues.
Thanks for sharing those statistics, and again, shout out to the Nicole Project. So I just want to pause here, and I did not say this, but this is an interactive live, so we definitely want to hear from you, your questions, your comments. So please put them in the chat on Facebook and on YouTube. So I'm troubled. I mean, this is really hurting my heart to hear that decision making, and I'm thinking bad things are going to happen is the source of, this high anxiety amongst our youth, our Black boys and girls. And so, any thoughts around how to help alleviate some of those, those thoughts and those, fear of decision making?
Well, I will say this. I think it's important to focus on both the COVID-19 pandemic and issues around racial justice. Right. So one happens to be primarily about grief and loss. The COVID-19 pandemic was really about a lot of grief and loss, both like death and also just loss, abstract loss of routine, just loss of safety, that kind of thing. And then you have these social justice issues, which are primarily about exposure to trauma. And see, this is why in my practice, we see those two things as one and the same. It all involves grief in some way. It all, and the sum total effect of both of those things is that it makes the world feel like a much less safe place. And whereas you have other groups that have these safe havens that they can go to, what if your worst case scenario is played out for you on TV every single day as a Black youth? And we do a lot of focusing on how it is to be a young Black man, but you have Breonna Taylor and you have Sandra Bland and you have all of these other young Black women too who have faced similar fates. And so for our youth, the primary issue is that the world does not feel like a safe place specifically for them. And so the short answer to your question is, and I think what comes out of this study is that we as a community, most of our focus around this issue has to be around how do we create those kits of safe spaces for our Black youth.
So let me interrupt you here just for a moment. I want to pause and poll our viewers. So of the viewers that are on, I want to know, are your children or are you interacting with any children that feel like they are unsafe in the world post pandemic, in dealing with the social injustices, the racial injustices, if you will, in the comments, just, give us a thumbs up or give us a church finger or raise your hand and let us know. Do you have any youth that you have that have expressed that they don't feel safe, they aren't feeling comfortable in the world? Let me know. Let us know, because I'm really curious about that. I volunteer at a elementary school here in Tallahassee, and I went to an open house at the school recently, and the principal was telling me that one of the students sneezed, and it was on or near another student who was wearing a mask, and the student that was wearing the mask freaked out. I mean, ran out of the school because they were fearful of, I guess, getting COVID or, being exposed to their breathing space or what have you. And so I thought, wow, this is elementary school. And, for a child, you're talking 10 years between maybe, 5 and 10 years old to be really concerned about that. so much so that they like are, you know, wanting to leave the school is, you know, it's just something that, you know, I can't imagine being that age and being concerned about that to that level. But, you know, that was just kind of eye opening for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I often talk to people about when they are asking about, you know, why mental health issues seem to be more prevalent with this current generation as opposed to previous generations, I have to remind you of what their norm is now. You know, they really do live in a way world than we grew up in. Their norm now is not only just fire drills at school, they've active shooter drills at school. So for a lot of us, this is going back to the idea of where do you find your safe spaces? For a lot of us, even those of us who grew up in inner cities, sometimes school was that safe haven. That was that place that you could go to and feel safe and protected and seen and sometimes loved by the teachers and the administrators there. Now, school is one of the least safe places for children to be. And so, you know, we didn't grow up in a world where school got shot up every other week.
Right.
That is a different reality. I remember being in school when Columbine happened, and how that was a shock to the world. I mean, we just all kind of collectively stopped breathing. You know, it almost felt like for a little while because we just couldn't believe that something like that could happen. Now, you know, you're hearing about it every other week. And so I think it's important to recognize that there are things that our kids are going through that we have never had to go through before. Again, the pandemic being another one of those. Could you just imagine? I mean, we used to get into all kind of stuff as kids. We used to go play in the mud and all that. Never thought about germs in that way. Now, your friend sneezes on you and it could be life or death for you. So, you know, you look at that and you go, well, why do they have higher anxiety? It's a no-brainer. Just look at what their reality is. So, you know, again, just so important to look at how we can create felt safety for our kids.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I actually was on the Michael Cork morning show this morning, and I talked about suicide. And I specifically talked about some of the risk factors, and you know, naming those by different in different categories. So, if you will, let's kind of talk about some of the risk factors. I mean, you have talked specifically about Black children and some of the things that they are concerned about that is causing a higher level of anxiety. But I do want to, you know, if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit more about some of the other risk factors associated with suicide and death by suicide.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah. So
one moment. Hold on one moment. I got a couple comments. I just want to, while I got them on here, I want to just take a moment to bring attention to some of these. So Lenitra is on. Thank you for being on, Lenitra. Lenitra is one of our wonderful news anchors at WCTV. In Tallahassee. She told us she was off tomorrow, so she was able to watch the show tonight. So I'm glad that she's here.
Okay.
She said, I'm a Sunday school teacher, and I haven't had the opportunity to bring these topics up with the boys and young men in my class since we were closed for 2 years from the pandemic. Now that the students have started to return to church, I will bring this up, and I'm interested to hear how they feel. Yes. So
that's awesome.
Appreciate you being willing to have those types of conversations with them.
Yeah, and Lenitra, that's one of the things too, because we were talking about what do we do, how do we help them? That's one of the things that is one of the biggest protective factors, youth and suicidal ideation, is we as therapists are always assessing, does person, like prior to coming to therapy, or maybe the family decides the child they don't want to put out in therapy, does this child have at least one adult in their life that they can talk to about things like suicide without feeling judged? That's a huge, huge factor. So I want to just applaud you as a Sunday school teacher for being that maybe that one help for these young men to really just have some real open and honest conversation about, because a lot of times they're going to their friends for advice. A lot of times they're turning to the music for advice, which can be dangerous, you know, considering some of the artists that are out there now and the subject matter that they're talking about. But having one adult who they don't feel judged by, who they can say, yes, I've had these feelings before, it makes a huge difference between having thought and acting on it. So I applaud you for that, Anitra, and I encourage you to do have that conversation.
Absolutely. Yes. No, that is very important. So that's one of the protective factors, is having one adult that a youth can talk to non-judgmentally. So Anisha, again, kudos to you for that. All right, so we got Paroa 47 said, greetings all, thank you. A majority of the youth and people that I've worked with that have reported these types of feelings and behaviors identify the type of relationship they and we have as a source. So that is another issue. She said,
so I want to understood that comment. You're saying that that their relationships are a source of depression and anxiety, or the relationships that they have are a resource?
So I think what I'm hearing or getting from that, because I asked if folks would share whether or not the youth have been experiencing this anxiety with decision making, with the bad things happening. You know, how many of them are experiencing that, and so identifying types of relationships they have as a source. So maybe Paroa, give us a little bit more clarity on that. Are you saying that the relationships are a source of the anxiety, or they are something that is helping to alleviate the anxiety? Give us a little bit more clarity on that. All right. And then Hassan said, yes, being that person or you can confide in makes a big difference. So Hassan is in Pensacola, and he has a youth mentorship organization, nonprofit, actually. That he specifically works with Black boys and men.
Oh, that's awesome. Can I share a story?
Sure.
Okay, so a personal story is I will never forget my high school choir teacher. His name is Dr. Christopher Jordan. I'll never forget him. When I was in high school, I didn't recognize it at the time, but I was severely depressed. And he just made sure he kept me active. I had no idea why this man just kept, you know, he would all the time kind of just volunteer me to do all kinds of extra stuff after school. And I would be like, dang, I don't have a break, because even my weekends would be filled with stuff that he would have me doing. And one day, one evening, we were out at some field trip or performance or whatever. And I had made up in my mind that night that I was going to complete suicide. And he knew. He knew. And he pulled me to the side. And it's a conversation that when I go back to it, still gives me chills. The way he spoke life into me, literally spoke into me. And so I always talk to parents about the importance of, listen, your kid may not talk to you about these things. Don't take it personally. But if they can find an adult, a teacher, an uncle, an auntie, a neighbor, if they have someone in their lives that is able to keep an eye on them and who can have those kinds of real conversations, that is a real lifesaver. And I'm speaking from experience. I will never forget it. He pulled me into that chorus room and must have like 2-3 hours of just speaking life, giving reasons to look forward to living. So it's not always therapy that's required, but it's encouraged, you know, and so kudos to you, Hassan, for doing this amazing work. mentorship is so very important. And when young men can see other men who aren't afraid to talk about things and to talk about the hard things that we carry around, it gives them, kind of renewed courage to do the same in their own lives. So kudos to you. You got some amazing people on this chat, Nicole.
Thank you. Thank
Awesome.
you so much. They are awesome. So Hassan said, I work with youth on a daily basis, and most of them have a parent that's incarcerated, and it affects them in so many ways. Then from the pandemic to peer pressure and bullying leads to hopelessness and abandonment.
So true. So true. We haven't even talked about the impact of bullying. But yeah, and that piece around, and I'm assuming that most of the kids, the parent who's incarcerated is the paternal parent. That issue of fatherlessness due to incarceration is so big in our community. Again, that's that concept of abstract grief. My father's alive, but he's gone. And I'm trying to navigate the world and understand what it means to be a young Black man, and what that looks like, trying to figure that out on my own. I was on a podcast recently, and I talked about how you have not heard cry. You have not heard a cry until you've heard the cry of a young man who has just realized how much he misses his father, how much he needs his father. That is a guttural. Unfortunately, I hear it all too often in my office, and I'm sure Mr. Hassan probably experiences that. But that's maybe another topic for another discussion. But that is a type of grief that is very specific to our boys.
Wow. Yeah, no, that definitely is abstract grief. This is a new term to me, so I'm excited about learning more about this. All right, so Parole said people have identified different concerns and problems with the relationships they have with other people, such as poor family relationships or concerns with friendships and intimate relationships.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I thought you were suggesting. Yeah, that's a big factor. That was certainly a factor for me growing up. The quality of relationships parentally at the time was a big stressor for me, and I'm careful not to put all the blame on parents, though, because for the part, parents are doing the best that they can with what they have.
Exactly.
So I always say to parents, the best thing you can do, especially with this generation, is try and remember that you don't know everything. Try and remember that kids are a lot smarter than you were at their age, not just because they're more intelligent, but because they're exposed to more information than any other generation. Yeah, they have more information at their fingertips than any generation in the history of the world. Right. So I think as a parent, it's helpful is to go into it understanding that you are going to learn just as much from your child as the child is going to learn from you. And you've got to be willing to unlearn and to relearn some things.
For sure. So let's hold on. Before we dive in a little bit deeper, I just want to do my little station ID, which is to let folks know who are just joining us. I am on with Antwan McKenzie-Plez of It's All Grief Counseling Agency, based in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He goes by Twan, the counselor, and we are talking about suicide and grief and helping our young people cope with it all. So, Twan, again, those risk factors are huge and can really, do a number on our young people. So a few of them that I think are worth talking about are, you talked about a history of depression and anxiety. Someone mentioned their relationships with their family members, with their friends, those intimate relationships. And intimate does not necessarily mean sexual, but intimate, close relationships. But also a sense of hopelessness, right? A sense of
Yes.
hopelessness. Um, there also can be individual risk factors around maybe serious illnesses where there's chronic pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then substance abuse and misuse.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The other thing that is a really big risk factor is certain kinds of traumatic experiences early in childhood. So chief among them are youth who have experienced any kind of sexual abuse or sexual trauma. That puts them at significantly higher risk for suicidal ideation, even if it happened in years that we call pre-verbal years. You have a lot of people that have experienced sexual traumas during those ages before they could really talk about what happened. And so that comes up a lot in work that I do with adults. Frankly, I use EMDR a lot, spotting, and sometimes a memory from our pre-verbal childhood comes up. We don't even have words for, and people make that connection that, oh my God, something bad happened to me. And a lot of times we're able to connect it with current experiences of depression and worthlessness, hopelessness, and suicidal ideation. So trauma, you really want to, there's a questionnaire that I would like to encourage anybody who's working with youth or just parents, in general. A lot of times you don't find out things that your children have been through because you just simply haven't asked. You haven't asked the right question. But there is a questionnaire called the ACE questionnaire, ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences, that kind of, has this ever happened to you? Has that happened to you? Right. And based on that score, we can pick certain things about what that child may experience later on in life. So we can't throw out, that's a huge factor. If there's been an experience of any kind of trauma, that increases the likelihood of suicidal ideation.
Now, do you use the ACEs test for your clients?
For my kids and adults. Everybody gets one. Everybody gets that work.
Okay. Very good. Yeah. So Lenitra also further commented that your testimony touched her. She said, that is always my prayer, that I make a difference in my youth's lives. Teaching them the Bible in Sunday school is important, but I always make it a point to create bonds and positive relationships with my students. I want them to know that there's someone they can feel safe with and know I care and love them. Beautiful.
That's beautiful. And that brings up something when we talk about unlearning and relearning. A lot of times youth don't talk about having those kinds of thoughts in church because historically we have taught people that those who commit suicide are bound to hell.
Yeah.
And I would encourage you, if kind of the talk in the church, I would encourage you to be a change agent around that, so that kids don't have that additional shame. It's already hard enough to carry around the fact that you have these thoughts, but then when you compound that with guilt about having the thought and shame about having the thought, that makes the likelihood that they reach out even to somebody that they trust in the church much lower. I think, in the church, we could do a better job around that it's okay to talk about having those thoughts, and that there's a very big difference between having the thought and acting on it. And the way that we can put a bigger divide between you having the thought and acting on it is talking about it. Yes. It's being okay to just say, I'm having these thoughts. And then we can dig into why that's coming to you. And then we can dig into what kind of resources we can get for you. But we really have to pull down that stigma and shame as far as the church goes with, committing suicide. We changed the language around that as well. We have recently shifted to talking about completing suicide as opposed to committing suicide, because committing has that sort of judgmental tone to it. So,
Right.
Lenitra, you bringing up some good points. Man, you got to talk.
Yes, death by suicide is the terminology that is also used as it relates to it. So
yes,
we definitely want to change that language and, you know, like you said, have those conversations. So this is good. This is good. So what are some other risk factors that maybe we might not be thinking about, but that the youth are experiencing?
I think you definitely have to also look into, you know, we used to call it peer pressure back in the day, but you know, as a parent, it's just so important to know who your kids' friends are, and to know their parents. And I know that that's hard to do nowadays because we are not as communal as we used to be. You know, that used to be a given, a no-brainer when I was growing up. You know, your parents were gonna know my parents if we hung out together. And nowadays, you know, we don't tend to do that. But I think it's so important for you to know who your kid is. I've heard, you know, very scary things like suicide pacts that teenagers make, where, you know, hey, if I do it, you do it, that kind of thing. You really want to know who your friends are. And there's Lenitra again with another good point. Bullying, huge risk factor. As you could imagine, if I'm going to school every day and being teased and told I'm ugly, I'm stupid, and this and that, that creates a sense of business, particularly when you have reached out for help for the bullying and you don't get it. And it seems like nobody's paying attention to what you're going through. That's a huge risk factor as well. So I think we did a pretty good job of naming most of them.
Okay. So I just wanted to, you know, again, maybe their risk factors might be a little bit different from an adult. So, you know, like you're saying, the bullying piece is definitely a big one. I think also social media is a big one as well. Yeah.
And remember, that's another form of bullying that they have to deal with that we didn't have to deal with. You know, our bullies, the bullying stopped when we left school for the most part, or when we went home. And now their bullies follow them around online all day, every day. And so also just social media use in general, at the rates that our youth use it, lead to depression and lead to anxiety. So, you know, kids don't like suggesting this, but I always say, hey, are you monitoring that screen time? Because they're getting bombarded with so much information, so much comparison about what they have versus their friends online. You know, kids who grew up 2000 and later, you know, their whole lives are lived online in a sense. And I'm not saying that in a judgmental way at all. I'm just saying that that's their reality. And they really require some guidance, understanding that life is so much bigger than what's on this app. Most of us had the benefit of growing up in a world that was pre-internet. So we understand on the fundamental that life is much bigger than this app. But a lot of them, they, you know, Facebook was around and Instagram and all this was around before they weren't. So teaching them, you know, going back to some basics of, you know, learning to build relationships offline. Imagine that. What a novel idea.
Wow.
To go to an actual club after school and meet people and talk to people.
And talk to them.
And go and have lunch with your friends.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Imagine
so yeah,
that.
Social media can be a factor as well. For adults
going
too.
outside, look, going outside to play. How about that?
Right. I went to my godson's football game the other day, and it reminded me of how good things like that are for kids. Team building, getting to just realize that, you know, stuff happens offline. You can have a great time doing it, and you could be learning things and being supported in your community. So yeah, it's just, you know, that's a good point. Really, you know, watching that social usage as well is key.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's, if we can, shift a little bit and talk around some of the resources that are available for you.
Okay. Should I, is this a good time to plug my resources? Because
It
I got
is
some
a good time
resources.
to plug
All right.
your resource. Segue, segue, segue.
All right. Awesome. So, in addition to being a therapist and clinical director, I'm also a published children's author. And at the beginning of this year, I published the first of a series called Kareem Learns to Cope. And the first book deals with coping with grief and loss, specifically traumatic loss. So I have the book here. Let me just show the cover. I hope it
Yes,
shows.
hold it up, hold it up. Kareem learns to cope
All right.
with traumatic
My
loss.
virtual background is messing things up, but it's a children's story about a little boy who, ironically, we were just talking about this earlier, who loses his father in a very traumatic way. And you probably couldn't tell from the cover because of the background, but Kareem is a little boy, and he's 8 years old, and he loses his father in a very unpredictable way. And so the book is really written as sort of a manual for parents. The beginning of it just about what are those signs that you should be looking out for that says that this is a kid who just experienced a loss and really needs some help. And so the book kind of just really explains that. It takes some really high level concepts and boils them down into very simple language. The book is also kind of a guide for how you get through these and how things like being open and vulnerable can be helpful, how things like crying it out, finding someone to talk to about it can be helpful. And it's also inside the story is also a little bit of manual for kids to support their friends. So Kareem has a best friend in the book named Jaden, who has also recently had a loss. He lost his grandfather to coronavirus. And so the difference between the two is that Jaden has been to therapy and he's worked with a therapist on his grief. And so he's sharing some of the information he's learned from his therapist with Kareem and helping him to, you know, really process in the book. It's one of my favorite books. I know I wrote it and that makes me biased, but it's one of my favorite books. So I have that. And then there's a companion to it called the My Grief Journal. And it's a journal for kids. And it's a guided journal for processing traumatic loss. Now, I made this because I wanted some of the things that we talked about in the book to kind of live outside of the book and allow people to be able to put them into practice for themselves. And the journal is really for that kid who the parents may not be ready to put them in therapy, maybe has some misconceptions about therapy, but wants to really give the kid some help. And so these are activities that either the parent or the grandparent or caregiver can do with the child. And these are therapeutic activities that you can do with the child to just help them with processing what's coming up, helping them to understand their grief and their loss.
Nice.
Don't get it twisted. It's written like it's for children, but I've had lots of adults to say, you know what, I picked up that book and I learned some things about myself. I learned some things about some losses that I was still grieving. So it's written at that level, but it really delves into some really high level concepts. So those are two great resources that you can share with who are dealing with grief or traumatic loss. The other important resource that we need to talk about is the Biden administration did a great thing in creating a simple number for our suicide prevention line, which is now just 988. Just like you have 911 for emergencies, you now have an emergency phone number that people can use if they're having suicidal thoughts and need to kind of talk through them. 988. We need to teach our children that is just as important as 911. And other than that, I will say if you're in the state of Florida, my company, It's All Grief, is a great resource. You can find out about us at www.itsallgrief.com. That's also where you can order copies of the books if you're interested. But we do consultations for families all the time. You know, if you're feeling like you're not quite ready to approach therapy, we have coaches and we do consultations all the time to help families in need.
All right. So I have the number and the website and your social media handle all at the bottom of the screen. So that would be a way to also connect with you and get more information about the book. So you mentioned 988. That is the new suicide prevention hotline. You can do call or text there. And that is, like you said, a very important number. I would also add NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness. They do not offer counseling, but they do offer support for persons that have a mental illness, or family members or friends that are supporting someone with a mental illness. So they have a number of support groups. So you can go to NAMI.org to find a local affiliate in your area. All right. So, this is a big topic for us to try to cover in one in 1 hour.
It
But
is.
I do want, just to touch on as we get ready to close out, grief is your specialty. So I do want you to kind of touch on that a little bit. I mean, you have by mentioning the book, and in the book, you're saying that it's okay to cry. It's okay to go to counseling. Even as a youth, it's okay. It's okay to
Mhm.
journal, to write out what's going on with you, what you're thinking, what you're feeling, right? So,
Mhm.
can you give us some other kind of, as it relates to grief, some other guidance or tips or, things that we can share with our youth about grieving?
Yeah. Um, well, I won't go into any specific techniques because those are there in the journal. Those are
Hmm.
things that the parent can do with the child. But I will say this: as adults, probably the most important thing that we can do is to be willing to consider that what we think we know about grief may not be right.
Hmm.
To at least consider that there is some new information and some new things that we can learn about grief, and particularly about children's grief. And consider rethinking some of the things that we habitually say to children around grief. Chief among them is be strong.
Hmm.
I want us to really, really, especially in the Black community, that's probably the biggest thing. And I deal with big old 40-year-olds who still struggle around that fear of being vulnerable, that fear of quote unquote breaking down, because it was drilled into their minds at an early age. You be strong for mama, you be strong for auntie, you be
Hmm.
strong for your siblings. And so what that has created is a culture of grief phobia, not just in our communities. I think America in general is grief phobic. We are uncomfortable with
Hmm.
dealing with people's grief. And we say things like, be strong, crying, it's going to be all right. We say things like that because really we are uncomfortable with what the person is sharing.
Yeah.
The truth is that most of the times when that kid comes to talk about how sad they feel and how much it hurts that this person is gone now, we say things to them like be strong and don't cry because we fear that we don't have the answers.
Hmm.
And guess what? Most of the time they ain't even coming to you for the answers. They
Hmm.
just coming to you to be heard. And so I think that's probably the important thing I could say here on this live is that please reconsider some of the things that we just habitually say to children and to adults about grief. Make the space that you create for that person a totally open space for them to share. And if you can't do anything else but hold space for them because you don't know what to say, most of the time they're not looking for you to say anything. I'm telling you, I hear this all the time. The most annoying thing for a griever is for them to be talking about their grief and somebody starts telling them about the time they lost their mama and what they did to get through it, and it's going to be all right. And it's, well, no, they don't really need that. They just need you to be there and have empathy.
Yeah.
So that is probably the biggest thing. If you don't remember anything else from this, how do you help your children with grief and or suicide? Listen. Do less talking and listen. Like we said, this generation is already exposed to more information than any other generation before them. So any answers you think you could provide to them, they could find online.
Yeah.
That ain't really what they're coming for.
Right.
Be that space. Be that space for them.
For sure. So thank you for that. And I think you hit the nail right on the head as it relates to what can be done. So Lenitra had a question that I definitely want to address. She said she has a 10-year-old sister. A couple of weeks ago, she asked if she had been bullied. And as she asked more questions, she said, "Dang, you nosy." I was taken aback by that, but I calmly replied by telling her, "No, I just care." Because of our huge age difference, I wondered if she saw me in that moment as just another adult trying to pry. Although we do have a close relationship, any advice on how I can have that conversation with her so she'll know that it's out of love and concern and probably not being nosy? I can't read the rest of it, but you get the picture, I think.
Okay, yeah, and 10 years old, at that age, privacy starts to become a little bit of an issue for kids around that age. So I'm sure your sister understands it was well intentioned. You probably are the very first adult to ask probing questions like that of her. So what I will say to you, Lenitra, is don't feel bad. It happens to me too as a therapist. The kid is always like, just kind of taken aback by asking those questions. But here's the thing: if she didn't want you to know, she wouldn't tell you. And it's always okay to say, "Hey, is it okay if I ask some?" And I know that we're really you're becoming more and more used to talking to children like little people, as opposed to the way we used to, which was that we used to have this idea about children being seen and not heard. But we're starting to really understand that children are little people, and it's okay to ask for consent to ask for more questions. Do you mind if I have a few more questions about that? And if she's done with your questions, she'll tell you she's done with your questions. But I tell you what, that plants the seed, that persistence plants the seed that if she did want to talk to you about something more serious, that you're a safe person to do that with. So I would say keep at it. Get into the habit of asking consent to ask more probing questions, because that shows respect. Sometimes people try to force their children into therapy with me, and at a certain age, that just doesn't work. And so, some parents get a little frustrated because we do a few sessions and the kid is like, I don't know if I want to do that. Allow that. They'll come back. They always do. They come back. They remember that nosy guy who was asking all those questions the next time they get into a really stressful situation, and they'll ask for the help when they want it. So I hope that answers the question for you.
I think it does. Thank you so much. So real quick, because I know we are just a little bit beyond our hour, but somebody texted me that's listening and said to ask how to handle a broken heart. How to handle
Now, is this for that person, for a child?
Well, we're talking about you, so let's take it from that standpoint.
Mm. I would like for this to be here so I could get some more information on what that is, because that could go so many different ways. But I will say, as a trauma specialist, I work from a very specific. We help people to stop avoiding. We help people to stop avoiding pain of whether it be a broken heart or loss of identity, whatever it is. We help stop avoiding the things that's giving them pain. And so if you have a broken heart, the answer is to dig in and not avoid, to really take the time. And that feels overwhelming sometimes to do by yourself. But if you can find a therapist, or if you can find a coach, or you can find a good clergy person that you feel safe going into that with, you have to go there. That's the only way that we can lessen the pain around that, is we really got to dig into, why is my heart broken? Again, that question, what have I lost? Because a lot of times death is just, the cover, the fact that the person is not here, that's just the beginning of grief. Really, we help you to understand is, what are those other things that you lost in this? I might have lost my mom, but maybe also what I lost was the one person in my life that I could really be 100% honest with. And now I'm struggling to find that again. Maybe what I really lost was the person who kept me safe and made me feel most safe in the world. So you got to be willing to go there with it. And that's the only way we begin to heal from a broken heart. We've got to dig a little further into it. That's me giving you an answer at about 30,000 feet, because I don't know all the details. But if that person wants to reach out directly to do some consultation, they can feel free to reach out to me on the website, and we can talk a little bit more about it.
Nice. And tell the folks how they can connect with you again.
So our website is www.itsallgrief.com. There you can find profiles of all of our therapists and coaches and good resources and things like that. You can also send me an email at asktwan@itsallgrief.com. Our phone number is 944129698, but I highly recommend you send an email in lieu of phone calls. We are working therapists, and we are busy most of the day, Monday through Friday. For those who are specifically interested in services and getting started with therapy, it's best to email my practice manager. Her name is Whitney, and her email address is Whitney, WHITNEY, @itsall.com. If you kind of already know you want to seek therapy services, you can email her directly, and we'll get you paired up with the therapist and get you started.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So you are taking new clients?
I am not taking clients personally, but
not you, but I mean It's All Grief.
But my practice is taking clients at this time. Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. All right. Well, I hope this has been beneficial to the viewers. If it has, if you will, give us a thumbs up or hand clap or something in the chat. That would be helpful. We're gonna have to have you come back, Twan, because.
All right. Listen, I told you I'm auditioning for my show on the Greater Works Network. I told you this. So
listen, you did.
I'll be happy to come back.
We're gonna have to do it. We are going to have to do it. Yes. So let's make it happen.
Yes.
Let's make it
happen.
And
I really appreciate you. And I say that from the very first call, I felt such a synergy. And I just appreciate the conversation. I appreciate you exposing this information to your audience.
Absolutely.
Because we all need it.
Absolutely. So we want to encourage folks to share this with others who you think will benefit from it. You know, we got to keep the conversation going. Again, September is Suicide Awareness and Prevention Month, and we want to encourage our loved ones to get their checkup from the neck up, get with a counselor, get with a therapist, and get the help that they need. Again, you know, someone in a crisis, they can always contact that 988 number either by call or by text. But if it's not a crisis, you know, reach out to Twan's group or a clinician in your area that you're comfortable with. And again, you know, talk to somebody, talk to them, talk to a licensed professional, and get the help that you need. All right. Um, Twan, and we can get the book and the companion guide from your
From
website.
www.itsallgrief.com/shop.
Okay,
That's where you
all right.
can order your copy of the book. They're also available on Amazon, but I prefer you get me.
Okay, all right. So you can
yeah.
get it. You can get it on Amazon, but Twan said you can get it from him as well at itsallgrief.com. So check them out. Check them out. I do want to encourage any of our new viewers to subscribe to the Conversations with Nicole YouTube channel. We are on live Mondays and Wednesdays at 8:30 p.m. And all we're talking about is Black and Brown mental health. On Wednesday, we have Ms. Zakia Foster, who is also based in South Florida. And we're going to be talking about Black women and suicide, specifically Black women and suicide. So you don't
That's
want
gonna
to miss
be
this
good.
conversation. Yes, 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 yes. And then Friday, we have Tan Lofton of Sweet Face, who's based in Tallahassee. She's also from Miami, though. She's on my regular season of Conversations with Nicole, so you can check her out on Friday on on YouTube and on Greater Works Network on Roku TV. All right. All right, good people. This has been great. Twan, thank you again for your time, your expertise. And again, we will have to have you come back one day soon.
Awesome. Awesome.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We'll see y'all next time.